What's up, Digital fam? It's your boy Drew. We're actually kicking off season 2 of the LZK Lessons Learned. We have our second episode of the season, episode 22, with a special guest, Kirsten Daniel. But before I start, I just want to say, hope you guys are staying creative at home. I just want to say thank you to all the community members that continue to support us every day, and mad love to the artists, music professionals, and just to make sure, subscribe to our channel. We're going to make sure we're going to put Kirsten Daniel's socials later after this episode. But without further ado, Kirsten Daniel, what's going on?
What up, Drew? Thanks for having me. How you doing today?
What up, what up? Happy Sunday. For those who don't know, we film a lot of our L's episodes on Sundays. How you doing? Well, first and foremost, how are you and the family?
Me and the family are good. We are ready for a Christmas break. So just counting down the last few days of work on this side of the year. Right.
Yeah. Same. I mean, I think it's interesting because we're doing a lot of pre-production. So I'm on the same boat. I've been quarantined with my family. It's been a year, but I'm super grateful that that this year is capping off and that the holidays are around the corner. So first off, I just want to introduce the digital community, how we know each other. So I used to work as a digital marketing director over at Def Jam. One of the mutual artists I used to work with was Landstrip Chip, who's a rapper, R&B singer, and used to work with that team. So that's how we know each other. And I have to say, your team was probably the most on point management team that I worked with. You kept us in check.
I hope that's a good thing.
It was a good thing. It was a good thing because I think it takes two to be proactive. So I think that's the beautiful thing about partnership, where both people are really challenging each other to make sure we get things across the board. So yeah. I love that.
You guys were great to work with as well.
Yeah. So shout out to you. So since then, obviously I've moved in transition in my career. So just for context for the community, introduce yourself. What are you currently working on? What are some of the projects you're working on? I mean, you've dabbled in various things within marketing, artist marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear more about it.
So I'm based in Atlanta, born and raised here. So this is still my home base. Prior to COVID, I would travel around a great bit just to make sure I was steadily networking with my fellow music execs, but that hasn't been possible this year. So I really just been holding it down from Atlanta. I work predominantly in marketing, and I have since about consistently since 2011. So wow. Yeah, it's been a while. I've done a lot of different things, but marketing is kind of just like the overall front of where my experiences lie. Right now, I'm doing a lot of freelance work, just working with a lot of different independent labels here in Atlanta, and some outside of Atlanta. I find my strong suit to be pretty much a translator between the independent labels and the major labels, because there's a huge disconnect. Yeah, there's a huge disconnect. And what I find is that the indies don't understand what they're supposed to be doing for the majors, and the majors don't understand how to tap into the independents so that they understand what the expectations are and how to keep the project moving. So project manager, of course, but my specialty is just kind of working with those that are on the ground, starting up and trying to get their feet wet and understanding the whole landscape and scope of the business.
I love how you summed it up as a translator, only because we're all speaking the same language, but more often than not, it's different. So, like you're saying one thing, they're like, wait. And we've experienced that both sides, from the independent side and major label sides, and trying to align that, just because the major label machine moves a certain way. And obviously the more boutique independent labels move a certain way as well. So we definitely have to distinguish the two. So I think the purpose of this podcast is really to highlight only not the people what they're doing now, but more importantly, just share their journey, because a lot of people see you as this, artist marketing, connoisseur, and as someone that understands how to market artists, but they don't know how you got there, right? So the purpose of this podcast is really to dissect and go back to the genesis of how everything got started. So you grew up in Atlanta. What growing up, did you grow up in a household like that, really like program music? What was like your first project or artist that you really started to like tap into?
So going back to household, I looking back, I'm realizing like how Christian my household was. So I don't remember a lot of music because early on I stayed with my grandmother. I don't remember
Mm-hmm.
a lot of music being played in the house, but I was in the choir at church.
Wow.
So I have a very early understanding of music and chords and how, melodies come together. But it wasn't, I only knew gospel music growing up until I got like to be maybe 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
And my next artist that I fell in love with, but beyond gospel music, was Stevie Wonder. I remember it vividly, riding in the car with my mom and Ribbon in the Sky came on, and I was just like emotional. I'm not even an emotional person, but I was just like, this song is so beautiful. It was a really beautiful song. So I think that's why I'm still like,
Stevie
go ahead.
Wonder.
Yeah, Stevie Wonder was
So you said
my,
Stevie Wonder was out.
yeah, Stevie Wonder was definitely it for me. And I think that's why I'm still so much in love with like, just singing music, R&B, alternative R&B. I still love vocals a great bit. So that was kind of like my first contact with music. Following that, I went to college, went all the way through school, never had a desire to work in the music business, didn't know anything about it, didn't know anyone in it, until I got out of college. In college, I worked at the college radio station, and then I did an internship at a radio station, and I didn't like it. I don't know I can't remember what it was about radio. I don't remember what it was. I just didn't love it.
Okay.
And also me being like a somewhat creative, the promo, I knew that promo didn't make a lot of money to start, so I was like, I need to make some money if I'm going to really be starting here. So fast forward to after college, a really, really, really close family friend of mine was Falant Johnson's father, and Falant Johnson was the guy that got killed in the shooting with T.I. around 2008, 2006 or 7. So prior to his passing, I had a conversation with him about an internship at Grand Hustle, and he's like, yeah, sure, I got you. Well, unfortunately, he ended up passing away. So, of course, I took a hit on the family, just being in that industry and losing a loved one. So it took a while for me to ask, but I ended up asking his father, like, hey, you think you can have a conversation with those guys over there to see if that I'd be, eligible for internship? And after months of like practically begging, he finally connected me, and I started in 2007, I think. The end of 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's backtrack a bit. So your first real introduction, well, you said you grew up in music that in a pretty Christian household, right? So they didn't play a lot of music. You talked about Stevie Wonder, Ribbon in the Sky being that song for you that hit the soul. And you love vocals. And then in college, your first job or role in music was working at a college station, but you didn't necessarily you weren't necessarily a fan of it.
Right.
But just to give some context, around 2007, T.I. was massive, right?
Huge. Superstar.
Superstar. Not to say he isn't now. He was like, that was his prime.
Yeah, no, we get it. But back then it was something that I had never, that only people now could imagine working with. I came in right after big things popping, so social media, social media wasn't a thing. So anywhere we went, it was just mobs of people. There was just so much energy around him, and he was literally like the biggest thing from the South at that point. So that's my introduction into music, working with a superstar.
Wow. So you finally land an internship. What was that first couple of weeks, or were you just like thrown into the deep end? Because I feel like that's a common thread for a lot of folks, including myself.
I'm gonna keep it 100. I felt like I was pledging again. I am a member of a Greek letter organization, but I felt like I was online again because it was so rigorous. It's just getting started. I remember they used to do a lot of events, and shout out to Hannah Kane because she's the one that just kind of pulled me in and start throwing things at me that I never even thought that I was capable of. But the first event was hey, so Tip is doing a birthday party and they want to do like a wrestling match with his cousin. So like, figure that out. I'm like, do what? And I just so happens to have like a friend that was a boxer, so I called him like, hey, how can we work this out? And so he walked me through, and that was like my start of marketing activations. It was at his house for an event, and I had no idea. She's like, put together a spreadsheet of all the expenses, and it was just throwing things at me that I had to figure out along the way. And I'm truly grateful for that experience. I helped her do every single one of Jeezy, Lil Wayne, and Tip's birthday parties for a few years, and every single event. Like, she's still killing it with the events, but every single event was like massive. And I had never been a event planner in my life. So I was just like, what is all of this? But little did I know it was leading me into the marketing realm. Like, understand, when something is released, we have to come up with a series of ideas, plans, and concepts that's going to support the release. So that was kind of like my first, I really think that happened like my first 2 weeks that I was working there. And I was just like, oh my God, this is crazy. And at the time, there was Young Dro was popping at the time. Lil Duval was there. Alpha Mega was another artist that had just released something with Wyclef. Every artist on the roster had something going on, and it was literally 3 interns and just them. So yeah, so things are a little bit easier now compared to back then, but it was still very intense.
Right. I mean, talk about that experience, because I think for a lot of folks coming into music, they look at the glamour of, going to these events, going to these shows. But I always like to say is that you have to love music, because it's so hard. There's so much work to do, and I feel like whether it's music videos or like Empire, I don't know what glamorizes it, but the internship experience, to your point, is probably like the most valuable, just because you can't learn a lot of these things through like studying at a school or a book. It's like through experience.
Nowhere. No, there's no way that you can be prepared for, the things that will be thrown at you. You just have to really be attentive and open, and like you said, you have to love it. You got to be willing to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty for the sake of the project, because things are going to constantly be thrown at you. And sometimes you may not be shown appreciation for all of the work that you put in, but you have to love it and one thing about me, I love the outcome. I love putting in a lot of hard work, and the project is released and everyone loves it, and everyone's a big fan. So just being able to see that has to be the driver to fuel you through, to like make sure you're making it through every single part of the process.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I just wanted to stress to the community, just because, like I said, there's perks to this, but like any other job or role or career, there's a lot of work behind the scenes. So I just wanted to stress that. Obviously, diving into a situation where he had to put together a wrestling match. What? So you put this event together. Where is your first experience working with, like, I guess more so like an album rollout or like an artist rollout in terms of marketing within the company? It
was TI versus TIP, and the role that's where I learned to do credits, because while there was someone there to create a lot of generate a lot of creative ideas, sometimes the admin work, because again, it was very indie, very mom and pops. Like, you had Jason, who was Tip's partner and over the label, and Hannah, who was general manager and a part of keeping the operational element going. Sometimes there were some lapses in the admin portion. So I learned how to do credits, because there was so much movement and shows and everything. We started to run against our deadlines with, getting all the paperwork done. So that was my first time being involved in a real album rollout. It was putting together all of the credits for that particular album. And of course, at the time when I was an intern, I was a schedule keeper. So making sure that everyone was abreast of every single appointment. That was at the time where you would go to the club. You would go to the club that night. You probably wouldn't leave, you go to the club, you go to the strip club, and then you have morning radio that you need to be there by 7. sometimes earlier. So that was at that time. So it was making sure everyone was on point throughout the whole day because there were so many stops.
Right. That's crazy. And yeah, just talk about like where like Atlanta culture during that time, just because I think a lot of folks are really seeing the product of Atlanta culture in terms of where music is now.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously back then, I mean, obviously even with Outkast and everyone else, like they had a big part of it, but like being T.I. putting, being able to like put a stamp to it with a lot of the other pioneers. But talk about like during that time to just give some context, like what was happening. Obviously strip club culture is huge in Atlanta, but just everything else
that
was
during
happening
that
around
time.
that time.
During that time, I think around that time, All-Star Weekend had not too long been in Atlanta. So we were still a hot spot for people that wanted to come and just have a good time for the weekend. So, a big part of marketing back then was street teams and making sure that you have a crowd of people just like sniping everywhere. So you got to think the energy behind a lot of releases around that time, whether it was Gucci, Jeezy, Ludacris, T.I., whomever, the streets were always flooded. So it's always felt very much like a music city because there were always in stores with record stores. So there was Peppermint Music and so many other stores at the time. There was always an in-store. There were always radio visits. There were always just a lot of marketing in the streets. So you learn to get excited about releases. The stores were always filled with lines, ready to get the album or ready to support, whatever appearance there was. Clubs have always been a very, very big thing here in Atlanta. So you knew that you started to promote, started to move around. And by the time that Friday came and the album was Tuesday, it was Tuesday at the time, the club was going to be lit. Like everyone was at the club, everyone. And it was just a movie back then. So you felt the energy everywhere. And that's one thing about Atlanta. Of course, that part of it isn't the same, but it's still a huge generator of talent here. And that's what I love so much about Atlanta. There's so much talent here, every corner. There's just something to work with.
100%. I had a great time when I went there.
Yes, you did.
Yes. Well, that's another conversation. That's another podcast. But
we couldn't do the magic, y'all.
I'll leave it at that. Good times. Just I think that's what I always want to give context because it's always important to like recognize the things that are happening around that time. So T.I. obviously was huge. Who else in Atlanta? I mean, you mentioned a couple other artists, but like who else like within his like circle, within his network was really popping? Just to give some context.
Oh man, let's see if my memory serves me correctly. Of course, Gucci, they weren't in the same circle, but Gucci was popping at the time. Jeezy was popping at the time. DTP had a roster over there. They had a group. I can't remember. They had Chingy, who was popping around that time. Or maybe, they had Chingy. Let's see. It was so many artists. I can't even think about all of them. It's gonna come to me as soon as we finish this. But there were just artists everywhere. Tip was always cool with Nelly, so Nelly had hits around that same time. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. Lil Wayne was a good friend of his, so he was always around. They were always dropping around the same time. So it was just a lot of great energy with a lot of like really, really, really big artists.
I love that. And then just talk about like, because you talked about like, I think we spoke about this when it came to press runs, you talked about the lifestyle marketing, like in stores, but just talk about like how artists would like go to the studio, literally hit the strip club, test the music out, then go back to the studio.
Yeah. It was one of those things. I mean, at that time, most artists lived in the studios. You lived there. I know a lot of people have setups up there at their home now, which is great, but you lived in the studio. And then as soon as that project was done, you had to travel around everywhere to market. One thing about the South, the Chitlin market, the Chitlin circuit is very, very important to us. So, Augusta, Columbus, Columbia, Albany, you got to go to Birmingham and Montgomery, you know, like you have to make Savannah, and there's a lot of prominent radio stations in those markets. So you have to, the artist stayed on the road. And at the time, you know, we had the Scream tour. So a lot of artists would be on different tours and come back. So there was always a lot of movement when it wasn't like the recording process. And so that's something I definitely remember, just how much you had to go and show up. You didn't have social media to promote, to press the button and the world sees your project. You have to get out there and go and show up to these communities and these clubs and these schools. You know, it was so many different pockets that you had to hit.
Right. A lot of the things that, you know, we take for granted, I think, because of digital marketing, but those things, those marketing initiatives where I feel like you gained the most fans and most conversion of fans just because they were so like impersonal.
Yeah,
and, like,
yeah, definitely.
You know, so I'm a big proponent and also supportive of lifestyle marketing. So I love that. So during that time, you know, what are some lessons learned that you experienced? Like, did you talked about various people that you worked with. Were there like any mentors that you really started to lean into and say like, hey, or like, you know, can you kind of guide me through this? I'm like trying to navigate, you know, your role a bit and trying to figure out like where your space is, because you're probably just like going and you're just like, you know, you don't know what's happening. Sometimes it's like you're like a hamster in a wheel just running, you know?
Yeah. And so that was pretty much how it was. I took a brief hiatus from music because I came in the gate like running, like you said. And like I was probably 22, 23 at the time. I needed time to process everything. And of course, you know, you hear from your parents, get a corporate job and get benefits and that sort of thing. So I went and did that for a few years and came back. Throughout the time when I came back, I did lean on Jason Jeter, who is still like a very, very great relationship that I have to this day. I started to lean into Yawanda Carter Scott is an attorney here in Atlanta, but I started working with her with Dro back in the day and Little C, who was a producer. I would correspond with her then. So it made it easy for me to develop a relationship with her. You know, and of course, as I mentioned, Hannah Kane was there as well for me. But yeah, but those are just a few of the people that I started to lean on for personal advice and mentorship.
Yeah, I think it's super important as you dive into, because you know they're in positions where they, you know, you were probably like years back, but it's important to like have that insight to like tap in and ask questions and never hesitate to like for support, you know. You know, you can't do it by yourself.
Definitely.
So so you go to the corporate world. Your parents are just like, you know, you got to get benefits, but part of you is like, hey, something is drawing me back. So what is that first role or job now that you have several years under your belt, both from a corporate standpoint, but also like, you know, doing what you did your first internship in music? Like, how did you feel? Like, okay, I know a few things now. I'm a bit ready.
So the weird thing is such a weird story. I'm gonna make it short. I worked corporate, and I was marketing and research at a company that made lottery tickets. Did that for a few years, and of course, like I said, I was hustling and bustling, starting in music. Well, I got to this company and I was at a desk every day, like literally counting down from 9 to 6 or whatever, 10 to 6, whatever my schedule was. Like, oh my God, I am about to die in here. This is the worst. So I decided, you know, I started to apply for a few jobs again, but I wasn't getting any leads. So I decided to go to Full Sail for a minute.
Oh.
Yeah, I decided to go to Full Sail, but I made sure that I kept in touch with all of my contacts here. So I called a few people and let them know what I was doing, and they said, okay, cool. Well, given my experience in music, I felt like once I got there, I could teach the class because it was like an entertainment business course. So I just felt like, you know what, this is crazy. I don't feel like I'm gaining anything from this experience. and it was crazy. But so I had a couple conversations. Long story short, the movie Takers had just been released, and Jason called and he was like, "Hey, I need some help with some things." So that speaks to like making a good impression, because even though I quit, he was able to call and say, "Can you help me out with some things?" Just based off of the impression, I guess, that I had on him. So I was like, "Yeah, better yet, if you move me back, I'll work for you again." And he was like, "Okay, cool, let's do it." So that's how that happened. And I've been back in music ever since 2011.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to know. I mean, Full Sail is known for, is a music school in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Florida? Is it Tampa, I
Yeah.
believe,
Yeah.
or
Orlando.
Orlando? Okay, cool. But yeah, sometimes, for someone that's gone through the ringer of learning a lot of these things firsthand, like I said, it can't be a substitute for what you're learning in class. Not to say that
Exactly.
those things aren't important, but you already got your MBA in music.
Exactly. Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know but I love to hear that, because I think having that break, you had a chance to process everything, and then you went back. So once you started working with Jason, when did you start to like find your groove, and when did you feel like you got your first win, like win, let's say small or big, but like you felt like, oh, I did that?
I think it was around the time that About the Money came out with him and Young Thug, and there was a program with the Atlanta Hawks. And so I was trusted to lead all these efforts, the merch partnership with the Hawks. Um, we were doing trade shows at the time, because of course there's not just music, it's never just one thing. There was a cool hustle gang in Stravers Road as well that had to travel with the music. So I started to be the person that people expected to lead all the efforts for, some of these ancillary things that accompany the music space. And so I think that was, honestly, that was it. I think it was curating a couple experiences at the Agenda trade show. Back then it was working with,
Agenda,
I think,
yeah.
yeah, I think working with Columbia was the label at the time, to curate a screening for the videos in New York from Atlanta. And I wasn't that familiar with New York at the time. And there are a few other things, but I think it was just the trust that was there. That started to be the win for me, is that people knew that I was capable of executing these things, no matter how big or small the tasks were.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's super important, because whether it's a small win or not, being able to take that confidence, so you can be able to do even more things, and ask for more things and be challenged.
Yeah.
Um, but during this time, was there like a lesson learned where you ever felt like, challenged in a sense where, am I doing the right thing? Is this overwhelming in a sense? Because I feel like a lot of folks, they'll go through those experiences. And how did you like kind of like overcome that?
I think that honestly that started to come when I started to kind of branch off and do my own thing a little bit more, which wasn't until later on. When I started to do my, have my own clients that I managed and work with on the marketing side, was when I started to question, like, am I doing this right? Because I didn't have anybody there to guide me, into what should be done.
Right.
I didn't have any accountability, to where if I didn't answer an email, that things were going to still happen. Like, I had no choice. So that's when it kind of got, my safety blanket was pulled from me. I didn't have Jason there as a partner to say, like, hey, can you take care of that part? I'll take care of this. It was all me. And I think that was kind of the first time that I felt very challenged, like, forget working with a huge artist that has huge, massive releases. It was really more so when I moved beyond that and had to trust myself, to be able to get things done.
Yeah, and I think that's super important to know, like anyone that's taking on entrepreneurship. But what was that experience like, really, to like set, go to another side of the music side and really bet on yourself, because I think that's it's very scary at times for a lot of people, just because it's to your point, you had the safety net of Ti and Jason, and
Mm-hmm.
what was that like transition like to like that first independent client, and talking about like building your confidence and being like an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I had to really lean into like my reputation.
Mm,
I didn't have these people on copy for, to validate my
right,
request. So it was hard
right.
at first. Sometimes people only want to talk to you based off of what you can do for them or
Hmm.
who you're connected to. So it can be hard when you're
Right.
coming in to try to develop a relationship based off of your own
Hmm.
client and your own skill set. So I think that was
Hmm.
the biggest takeaway. Like, all right, let me make sure that I'm keeping in touch with people if they don't respond or if I'm not getting what I need,
Hmm.
continuing to focus on the goal of the project, and
Right.
knowing that I have support from other people around me if needed, but making sure that I'm always staying focused on the goal, and I'm going to be as relentless for
Hmm.
myself and my clients as I was for this company and that client.
Yeah, I think you spoke about two things. One, having the goal in mind and focusing on that so you don't waver,
Mm-hmm.
and having the same approach that you did with Jason and the team,
Yeah.
and making sure you were able to deliver the same productivity, the same effort,
Yeah.
the same passion towards those projects.
Mm-hmm.
Says a lot. So during this time, you're. I'm just gonna just kind of fast forward. So
Mm-hmm.
you're into entrepreneurship. What areas of music did you start to really dabble into? Because you obviously worked in artist marketing, but you've had experience in management and so forth. Like, when did you start dabbling in those spaces?
I feel like sometimes it can be hard to say like what your role is going to be in music until you
Mhm.
try a couple different things. And it
Right.
was something I had always been curious about, but had never tried it. So I wanted to try it and see, how see
Oh, I'm
if
in artist
people.
managers.
Right, right. I wanted to try it, and I
Yeah.
tried it. I tried it, and I've realized my direction from there. After trying that, I felt like I knew everything about not everything. I'm sorry. I felt like I had great experiences in marketing. However, this was an area like I had learned enough to be able to direct an artist, to navigate what they should be doing,
Mhm.
what they should be working on, and I was just curious.
Right. Right. No, I think it's important to know, like, I started my career in music and music management. I managed a DJ.
Mhm.
So I think the language of artists and speaking their language, because essentially you're also a translator in itself, where you're
Yeah,
translating their vision, their emotions, and their moods to everyone else.
yeah,
you
yep.
know, whether it's the label or partners or brands, whoever, being
Mhm.
able to like convey those things. Um, what for you? I think, what did you take away from a lot of the management experience that you didn't necessarily have coming into it? Like, what were some of the takeaways for you in terms of skill sets that you were to walk away with?
Back to what I initially said, it was really just about trusting myself. I really
Hmm.
learned how to trust myself, my intuition, and my skill set a lot more as a
Right.
manager. Um, Another takeaway was making sure that I remain solid relationships in the business, period. It doesn't matter if it's the
Right.
janitor, the person in the mailroom, the
Hmm.
receptionist, or the assistant. Just making sure that I maintain contact with those people because you never know. um
Lesson learned.
Yeah, you never know. There's somebody at a label that when I met him, he was an intern, and now he's getting artists on Rolling Stones and Vogue, like, NPR. And I love to see it. I love to see it because you can't you can't count out anybody in the building. You can't discredit them based off of where they are. You have to anticipate where everyone is going to go, that everyone has your same drive, and that you treat them with respect. Like
Mm,
cussing people out and being upset with people at the label doesn't get you anywhere. So that was kind of like a big takeaway as well. You'll see everybody
but
again.
I mean, you summed it in those two, a few words. You'll see everyone again. I'm just going to stress that to the entire audience that's watching this, because it's so important, whether it's like the president of the company, the VP, whoever, the intern, like you don't know. And a lot of your, like I always tell people, like your reputation is your resume. The way that you talk to people, the way you deliver your emails, the way that you follow up and just get things done. I mean, people have like receipts, so they know. They know.
People will always remember the person that they did not have a good encounter with. So don't be that person. Don't be that person.
Right. No, that's super important. And I want to stress that for the community. So fast forward, just to backtrack a little bit. So your love of music, you know, like I said, it started with, you know, Stevie Wonder, you know, Ribbon in the Sky. Tapped in, hit your soul, you love vocals, you know, you fast forward to college, your first gig is at this college radio gig, wasn't having it, but you know, you found an opportunity to like intern with T.I.'s management team, and like for weeks you're just like, hey, following up, and it also goes to show your level of persistence and passion. You're able to get it. 2 weeks into it, they're like, figure out T.I.'s birthday party, a wrestling match, an event. Kudos to you, figure it out. So you tapped in, spreadsheets, figuring out expenses, tapping into your boy who is a boxer, you make it happen. Fast forward, you're now putting together like the credits to like T.I.'s project. You're in and out on the road, you know, promo runs, you know, going from like one in-store to like the strip club to the studio, just running, gunning with the team. You take a moment to reset, pivot to the corporate world for a couple of years, but you know, you realize like your heart's not there. You're counting the minutes to like leave, and then you you go into you know, potentially to school. Like you're like, hey, let me tap into school again. So you go to Full Sail. You talked about there's this like music business class. You're like, well, I already know this. And then Jason reaches out about takers, right? He said about an opportunity to help him out, and then, hey, back into the music business, back into the team. And then you talked about your first win with working with like the team in terms of like their merchandise, and you know, working with Atlanta Hawks and being able to be that person to be able to manage those things, because they had different offerings. Right now, it wasn't just the music; it was a coup. We talked about agenda and the trade show, and then you talked about the pivot where you made into like artist management and working as an entrepreneur. And the reason why I'm summing everything up is because there was just like steps to this, and I always like to like break down the steps, because a lot of people, like I said, they see you as this person that does all these amazing things with artists, but you went through the ringer to get to this point. You know, you went through a lot of like lessons learned, and then now we're here. The present.
We're here.
So talk about the things that you're passionate about now. Where do you see you know, music going for, you know, for you in your career going forward? And the third question is, you know, how's it been for you just being a woman in music, like being able to like really represent a boss, being able to like really drive a lot of conversation and like really demand that respect, especially for like a male dominated business?
Okay, I'll start with the first part. Where do I see myself going in music? And you know, what's my place? I guess, like, I feel like right now I'm just now starting to get like really, really, you know, I got my feet planted now. It took a lot of years to get here, you know, like the 10,000 hours thing is legit. It took me a long time to like change my mindset from being like an intern assistant to like an executive. And that's no, everybody, that doesn't happen like that for everybody, but it took me a long time to process it because it was so many baby steps that I took. But those baby steps really helped me to get to a place where I could see the fullness and the wholeness of all of my experiences. So I'm really appreciative for that. What I love is what I'm doing and what I've been doing. And it's basically taking artists from, no one knows them to starting a foundation, starting to talk to them about what they should expect, what they need to be doing, what they need to be working on. Because to me, like, there's just nothing greater than seeing an artist go from zero to nothing. Like I work with Jason when he flew Travis Scott to Atlanta for the first time. I went to New York for the signing of him to Epic with, like, years ago when that happened. I remember Travis Scott before anyone knew him, and like to be able to see what he's doing now, to me, I've not been a part of the process since, just to keep it a bug, but to see it like feels so good to me, like that a person is really achieving their goals and their dreams. Like that Travis is an artist that from day one, he knew what he wanted his career to look like. And it's so satisfying to me to see him accomplish those things. And that's what I love about the business. I don't have to work with a person that's at the top of their career. I like the building process. I like to come in and see, I like to communicate with them and to be the first to inform them, hey, you can't smoke here. Like there are certain expectations when you go places, like just the bare minimum of getting them to understand that this is your career and you have to take it seriously, like you're showing up to work every day. At a certain point, it's no longer just a hobby. And being a part of the teams and the systems that really establish that mindset from the beginning, and seeing them starting to take themselves seriously and like really grow into who they have the potential to be, is just something that, again, I'm like fully grateful for. And just to be a woman in the space, I feel blessed to be a woman, to be a Black woman, because it's hard. It's really hard. You have to, you got to get talked over on calls. You have to get looked over, when you walk into meetings. I'm a person that people always think that I'm the artist or the stylist. I've never been the executive, and I get it. I guess I take it as a compliment, but that's just kind of always the depiction when I walk up, and not the person that is fully responsible for the goal of this project. So it's really hard, but nothing easy, nothing worth having comes easy. So I take it as a privilege, to be able to really push through the small group of women, of Black women that are leaders and executives in the business. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to lead other women in the business as well. I mean, we've seen the Billboard articles, and we've seen how many Black women and how many women, period, are getting notified, just getting notoriety for their experiences and for the things that they've done. And every time I see a win for them, it's a win for me. So I'm grateful for, to be here, to have pushed through some of the odds, and to still be a person that people respect, and, to have the opportunity to work with such great talent.
I love that. Well said. I think for both parts, you talked about, Travis and that experience, but also more so about really seeing the artist's journey and seeing them achieve their goals. Says a lot about you, about that, you've always been an artist first marketer, always been an artist first music creative. You've always thought about the artist first, and, you always have the artist's back. I think that's one. And then two, about the women in music idea, where the perception of women, to your point, like coming into like a meeting and people thinking that you're a stylist, but you're the boss, you're the one that's running the show for the artists. And the fact that that's changing people, the narrative, just for people in the audience, Kirsten is one of our mentors for a music mentorship program, and she's also mentoring another amazing woman, another amazing Black woman in music. So, we're trying to like set that up and for the future, but that's super incredible, and it's something that's super important that the Digilog, and including obviously myself, we're very passionate about putting in the forefront. But outside of like everything that we spoke about, we talked about lessons learned and, you know, your journey. What is one thing we always like to cap off the episode? What is like one lesson learned, you know, from all the things that we talked about, from when you started in music to like where you are now, that you'd like to give for the digital community?
Okay. Honestly, like,
let's set that up.
This is because it's unpopular. Like, I feel like that way about myself. I mean, I feel like it about other people. But one thing I wish I would have done more is document my journey. I haven't documented, so I missed a lot of things. I'm like, we did do that, huh? I did put that together, you know. So make sure you're documenting the process. That's my little personal thing. But for anyone else, I think one thing I would say is know your core values and make sure that everything you do is in line with that. Create core values for yourself, and anything that's outside of those core values do not speak to the direction of your career.
You could, man, core values. I can't even stress that. So two things. One, when you talk about documenting your journey, I always like to tell people that are watching in the community is to like stay in the present sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we get so eager to like create a roadmap to like do the next thing. I'm like, what's next? But
yeah, I'm just gonna say some people are doing too much documenting and not enough work, and that's just a little side note. But I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to people that's really working. Sorry, guys.
Really, really working. So we want to distinguish the two. But I think it's important to like celebrate the small wins for a lot of folks, because you may overlook what you've accomplished, not give yourself credit.
Yes.
And it's important that you have the confidence, and for a lot of young folks to like say like, okay, I was able to put together this show for this artist. Not to say that this is it for you, but to say that, to give you the confidence to say like, hey, I can do more, and I've accomplished this one goal. So yes, make sure to stay in the present, document that, but make sure you're doing work at the same time.
Yeah.
And then two, I think the biggest thing for a lot of folks is, you know, when you're being questioned about going outside your core values, you always have something to go back to. And whether it's a marketing strategy or just the way that you approach people, the way that you treat people, if you don't have core values, like, it's going to be very hard to navigate in these spaces, because it's a very opinionated, ego driven music space. You know, you have to stick to it, because a lot of people are going to be like talking over you and saying this, that, and a third. And you're like, no, this is what I believe. This is what's true to me. And I feel like this is from my experience. This is what we need to do. But more importantly, I just want to say thank you for spending time with me. Thank you to the entire community for tuning in for season 2, episode 22 of the L's, Lessons Learned with Kirsten Daniel. I'm going to make sure to put our socials in our description. Make sure to like subscribe to our channel. Make sure to watch all the episodes, because everyone that we're featuring are music creatives that you need to know, get familiar with, and can't wait for our next episode. So make sure to support the Digilog on our socials, and we'll see you in the next episode. So talk soon.
Wait, I just want to say one more thing.
Oh, wait.
One more
thing.
Yes. I just wanted to thank you and the Digilog team. You have like a stellar team. Everything that you guys do is fucking amazing. The branding, the programming, everything is so bomb. And like, I'm really in awe, because of course I work in marketing. So I'm just like, how the hell he got time to do all of this stuff? But it's crazy. It's crazy that you're like, but that speaks to your passion and like the dedication you have to giving back. So I hope that everybody in your community realizes that this is such like a gem that most people that have been in the business did not have access to. This is literally like the cheat code right here. So shout out to you, and thank you to you for like putting all of your energy and your soul into this. I'm done.
Um, appreciate you. Appreciate you. So many kind words. Yeah. Yeah. No, we're thankful. I think we're hitting a really important inflection point with the community, and I think where digital is and digital learning, and I think we have an opportunity to really help a lot of people, not just in the U.S. but globally, really tap in. And the goal is really, to be honest, to like connect music creatives across the world, and hopefully there's a woman or a young girl in a country, let's say like India, and can hear this story and say like, hey, I could be a music creative as well. And that's the whole point. We want to inspire folks and do what they love, and not necessarily settle for things that their parents want them to do.
Love that. Right.
So without further ado, like I said, Digilog fam, love y'all. Make sure to tune in to our next episode and follow Kirsten. Talk to you soon.